On a Friday night in Dayton, Ohio, two men clocked out of the same warehouse job at the exact same time. Ryan Cole and Marcus Webb had worked side by side for 3 years. Same forklift certification, same $14.25 an hour, same overtime shifts. That night, both of their checking accounts sat under $60. If you looked at their bank statements side by side, you could not tell them apart. 10 years later, one of them was still clocking in at that same warehouse, still living paycheck to paycheck. The other one owned 3 businesses and hadn't checked a time clock in almost a decade. Same starting point, same 24 hours in a day, same exhaustion at the end of every shift. Nobody handed either one of them a map. Nobody warned either one of them about what was actually coming. So what actually happened in between? Years ago, a mentor of mine, a rough-around-the-edges contractor named Reggie Owens, sat me down after I lost almost everything and said something I have never forgotten. If you don't want to be like everyone else, you have to make the sacrifices others aren't willing to make. That sentence sounds simple. It is not. Because most people are not failing because they are lazy or unlucky. They are failing because they are walking straight into invisible traps, 7 of them that quietly keep smart, hardworking people broke for their entire lives. Most people fall into at least 3 of these traps without even realizing it. By the end of this video, you are going to know exactly which ones are draining your bank account right now, and more importantly, exactly how to climb out of them. Before I break down all 7, hit that subscribe button right now. I release a new breakdown like this every single week, and if you're serious about actually changing your financial trajectory instead of just watching another video about it, you do not want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Okay, let's get into it. My name is David Marshall, and for the last several years I have made it my job to study the psychology of wealth, not the lottery ticket version of getting rich, the real version. The version where regular people with regular jobs quietly build something that lasts. I've sat across the table from self-made millionaires, I've read the research, and honestly I've made almost every one of these 7 mistakes myself before I finally understood what was actually happening to me. This is not a lecture. Think of this more like a documentary investigation into why smart, hardworking people stay broke. In Ryan and Marcus, the 2 guys from that warehouse in Dayton, we are going to come back to their full story at the very end. Because what separated them is exactly what we are about to break down, one trap at a time. Trap number 1 is working only for money. This is the most common trap of all 7, and it's also the most invisible because on the surface it looks responsible. Here's what it looks like in real life. Imagine 2 paths open up in front of you after high school or college. Path A is the job that pays well right now. Steady paycheck, decent benefits, a manager who tells you exactly what to do every single day. It feels safe. It feels like the smart, mature choice. Path B looks worse on paper. It pays less. It might even feel a little unstable. But Path B puts you around people who are actually building something, and it lets you walk away with skills or equity, meaning real ownership, instead of just a paycheck that disappears the moment you stop showing up. Marcus, from that warehouse story, took something close to Path B in his mid-20s. He took a pay cut to help a small local business owner grow his online presence, and in exchange, he negotiated a small ownership stake along with total access to learn the skill himself from the inside. Ryan stayed on Path A because it paid 50 cents more an hour and felt safer at the time. Here's the actual trap hiding underneath all of this. Money you earn purely from labor has a ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day you can trade for a paycheck. But high-income skills, things like video editing, copywriting, coding, or sales, do not have that same ceiling because once you own the skill, you can apply it again and again, and eventually you can own equity in the outcome instead of just renting out your time forever. You need to focus on becoming someone worthy of equity. Not someone who just shows up and collects a check, but someone whose skills are valuable enough that other people actually want to hand you a piece of what they're building. That single mindset shift is where the gap between Ryan and Marcus first started, and trust me, it only gets wider from here. Here's a way to think about it that might make this click. A paycheck pays you once for the work you already did. Equity pays you over and over again for work you already did once. That's the entire difference between Path A and Path B, and it's why 2 people can work the exact same number of hours a week and end up in completely different financial universes a decade later. One of them is still trading hours for dollars. The other one built something that keeps paying long after the original hours are gone. Trap number 2 is buying a luxury lifestyle before you've actually built the wealth to support it. I need you to really sit with this one because social media has turned this into a full-blown epidemic. Scroll through your feed for 30 seconds and you'll see someone flexing a car they lease, a bag they financed, a trip they put on a credit card they haven't paid off. This is what I call the flexing trap, and its entire job is to make broke look like rich. Here are three numbers I want you to actually remember because they are not opinions. They are documented facts about the average American household right now. 37% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing money or selling something they own. 39% say they actively worry about paying their bills every single month. And 60% cannot afford to buy a new car if the one they're driving broke down tomorrow. Now hold that next to the flexing trap for a second. People are financing depreciating assets, things that lose value the second you drive them off the lot or unbox them, while 37% of the entire country can't handle a $400 surprise. Ryan leased a truck 2 years into that warehouse job. It looked great in photos. It also came with a payment that quietly ate almost $200 out of every single paycheck for the next 6 years straight. Marcus drove a used sedan with over 100,000 miles on it and put that same $200 a month into learning his new skill and eventually into a small business account. Nobody was impressed by Marcus's car, but depreciating assets don't build wealth. They just make broke people look busy. Here's the part that really stings if you're honest about it. The flexing trap isn't really about the car or the bag or the vacation photos at all. It's about status. It's about wanting people to believe you've already made it before you've actually made it. And the tragic irony is that the people who are genuinely building wealth almost never look like it in the moment. They look boring, they drive the older car, they wear the same 3 shirts. They look on the surface exactly like someone who isn't doing well at all, right up until the moment they suddenly are. Trap number 3 is trying to do absolutely everything yourself. This one hides really well because our culture worships the lone wolf, the self-made hero who supposedly did it all completely alone. Here's the problem with that story: nobody actually scales alone. Nobody, every single wealthy person you've ever heard of had a team behind them at some point, even if the headlines only ever mention one name. Leverage simply means using something other than your own 2 hands to multiply your results. That could be other people's time, other people's money, or software that works while you sleep. Let me tell you a true story most people don't know the full details of. Back in the early 2000s, a small payment company called PayPal had a team of young, ambitious employees, including a young entrepreneur named Elon Musk. When PayPal was eventually sold, that entire group of employees walked away with money and, more importantly, with each other. Instead of scattering in different directions, they leaned on each other's networks, capital, and experience to go build the next thing. That same circle of people went on to help start or fund companies like YouTube, LinkedIn, Yelp, and SpaceX. Journalists later nicknamed this group the PayPal Mafia. Almost none of those companies were built by one person locked in a room refusing all help. They were built through leverage, other people's skills, other people's capital, and other people's networks, all working together at the same time. Marcus figured this out fairly early. Instead of trying to learn accounting, marketing, sales, and operations all by himself, he partnered with 2 other people, and he used software tools, including an all-in-one CRM system to handle scheduling and client tracking automatically in the background. That's leverage in action. Ryan, on the other hand, picked up a few side gigs completely on his own, exhausted himself trying to be his own accountant, his own marketer, and his own operations manager all at once, and eventually burned out and quit after just 4 months. Doing everything yourself doesn't make you tougher. It usually just makes you slower, and eventually it makes you quit entirely. Trap number 4 is having way too many inputs. This is the trap almost nobody talks about, and it might genuinely be the sneakiest one on this entire list. In the age of the internet, you have access to more financial advice than any generation in human history has ever had. Podcasts, forums, group chats, 15-second videos from strangers who are also broke, all giving you confident advice on money. And here's exactly what that constant noise creates inside your brain. Cognitive overload, which is basically your brain hitting a wall from processing too much conflicting information at once. And once your brain hits that wall, it produces something called decision paralysis, where you become so overwhelmed by options that you end up taking 0 action at all. Ryan actually wanted to start investing around the same time Marcus started his business. He followed 11 different finance accounts online. One told him to buy real estate. Another told him real estate was a trap. One told him to put everything into index funds. Another told him index funds were for suckers. 18 months later, Ryan still hadn't opened a single investment account, because every single time he almost decided, a new conflicting opinion talked him right back out of it. Marcus did something completely different. He picked one mentor whose results he could actually verify in real life, and he quietly ignored almost everyone else online. Successful people rarely gather endless opinions from strangers. They work backward from a specific destination and only take advice from people who have already reached it themselves. Expert guidance from one proven source will move you further than 100 random opinions from the internet ever will. If you remember one single thing from this section, remember this: more information does not automatically equal more progress. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. Now, if you've made it this far, here's something you need to hear. The first 4 traps we just covered are the ones that keep genuinely lazy or unlucky people stuck, but the final 3 traps are different. These are the ones that quietly take down smart, disciplined, hardworking people, the ones who already fixed traps 1 through 4 and think they're in the clear. Ryan actually avoided a couple of these early traps for a while. It wasn't laziness that finally buried him. Stick around, because trap number 6 in particular is the one almost nobody sees coming. Trap number 5 is being ego-driven, and this one is uncomfortable because most of us don't love admitting we have an ego problem. Arrogance is a silent wealth killer. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It just quietly convinces you that you already know enough, that you don't need a mentor. That advice is for people who apparently aren't as smart as you. Here's a concept I want you to hold on to, called the iceberg principle of knowledge. Picture an iceberg floating out in the ocean. What you can see above the waterline is small. What's hidden underneath, invisible, massive, is everything you don't know yet. Most people who fail financially are not failing because they lack intelligence. They're failing because they mistake the small, visible tip of their knowledge for the entire iceberg underneath it. Ryan genuinely believed he understood money better than most people around him. He'd read a few articles, watched a handful of videos, and figured that was more than enough. When Marcus tried to tell him about the equity deal he'd negotiated, Ryan brushed it off as too risky, too complicated, and honestly not worth his time. Marcus, on the other hand, stayed humble enough to admit how much he still didn't know, and that humility is exactly what let him keep learning long after Ryan had already convinced himself he had all the answers. The moment you think you've learned enough about money is usually the exact moment you quietly stop growing it. Think about how many icebergs have sunk ships that were confident they knew exactly what was in front of them. The captain who thinks he can see the whole obstacle is far more dangerous than the captain who admits he can only see the tip and slows down because of it. Wealth works the exact same way. The people who keep asking questions, keep hiring mentors, keep reading, keep staying a little unsure of themselves are almost always the ones still standing a decade later. The ones who got loud and certain too early are usually the ones who quietly disappeared. Trap number 6 is passing the blame, and I want you to actually picture this with me for a second. Right now, imagine I'm holding 2 objects in my hands. In one hand, a magnifying glass, in the other, a mirror. The magnifying glass is what most broke people reach for first, almost instinctively. It's the tool of blame. You hold it up and suddenly everything wrong in your financial life gets magnified except you. It's your boss's fault for underpaying you. It's the economy's fault. It's a rigged system. It's just bad luck. The magnifying glass feels good in the moment because it removes all the responsibility from your shoulders. But here's the problem with that. If you reach for the magnifying glass, your excuses grow, so pick up the mirror instead. The mirror is uncomfortable. Nobody actually enjoys looking into it. But the mirror asks a completely different question. Not what happened to me, but what did I do or what did I fail to do that contributed to where I am right now? Marcus lost a client early on in his business, a fairly big one, and instead of blaming the client or the economy, he picked up the mirror and realized his own communication had been sloppy and inconsistent, so he fixed it. Ryan lost overtime hours around that same time and spent months telling anyone who would listen how unfair his manager was being. He never once asked himself what he could have done differently. One of these responses leads to growth. The other one leads to staying exactly where you are, forever convinced it's everyone else's fault but your own. I'm not saying the system is always fair. It isn't. Bad breaks are real, bad bosses are real, bad luck is real. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Even when the magnifying glass is technically correct, it still won't move you forward an inch. You can be 100% right about how unfair something was and still be completely broke 5 years later, because being right and being rich are not the same thing. The mirror doesn't ask whether life was fair. It only asks what you're going to do next. Trap number 7 is staying static, and this is the trap that quietly seals the fate of the other 6 if you let it. I want you to picture a circle. Inside that circle is everything familiar to you. Your comfort zone, your routine, your safe little corner of the world where nothing ever really asks too much of you. Here's the uncomfortable truth about that circle. It never grows on its own. It only grows when you intentionally step outside of it and take a calculated risk, something that scares you a little but that you've actually thought all the way through. Ryan lived his entire life inside that circle. Same job, same routine, same conversations, same excuses for over a decade straight. It felt safe. It also never grew a single inch. Marcus, meanwhile, kept stepping just slightly outside his circle again and again. A slightly scarier client pitch. A slightly bigger investment in his own skills. A slightly bolder ask for equity instead of just another paycheck. None of those steps were reckless, they were calculated, but each one slowly expanded what his comfort zone eventually became, until what used to genuinely terrify him became his new baseline normal. That's the real secret behind almost everyone who ends up building lasting wealth. It's not one giant leap. It's a full decade of slightly uncomfortable steps that most people are simply too comfortable to ever take. And here's the part that ties every single trap on this list back together. Working for equity felt uncomfortable at first. Skipping the flexing trap felt uncomfortable at first, especially watching everyone else post their new cars online. Leaning on partners instead of controlling everything yourself felt uncomfortable. Tuning out the noise felt uncomfortable, almost isolating. Staying humble when you wanted to feel like the smartest person in the room felt uncomfortable. Picking up the mirror instead of the magnifying glass felt uncomfortable. Every single one of the first 6 traps is really just the 7th trap wearing a different disguise. Staying static is the root. The other 6 are just symptoms. So let's go back to that warehouse parking lot in Dayton, Ohio, the one we started this whole video with. Same $14.25 an hour, same $60 sitting in the bank. 10 years later, Ryan Cole is still working at that same warehouse. He's a little more senior now, a little more tired, still leasing a new truck every few years, still telling people the whole system is rigged against guys like him. And honestly, in a lot of ways, he's not entirely wrong that the game feels stacked. But he never once picked up the mirror long enough to ask what he could actually control inside that unfair game. Marcus Webb now owns 3 small businesses, employs 11 people, and hasn't clocked into an hourly job in almost a decade. He'll be the first person to tell you he isn't smarter than Ryan. They started in the exact same spot on the exact same night with the exact same amount of money in the bank. What separated them was 7 quiet decisions made over and over again for 10 straight years. He worked for skills and equity instead of only a paycheck. He avoided the flexing trap and depreciating assets. He leveraged partnerships and tools instead of trying to do everything completely alone. He tuned out the noise and picked one single proven mentor. He stayed humble enough to keep learning. He picked up the mirror instead of the magnifying glass. And he kept stepping outside his comfort zone, one calculated risk at a time, year after year. Lay it out side by side and the scoreboard is almost embarrassing in how simple it looks from the outside. Ryan chose the paycheck, Marcus chose equity. Ryan financed the truck. Marcus kept the used sedan and funded his skills instead. Ryan tried to do it all alone. Marcus built leverage through partners and tools. Ryan drowned in 11 conflicting opinions. Marcus followed one proven mentor. Ryan stayed certain he already knew enough. Marcus stayed humble enough to keep learning. Ryan reached for the magnifying glass every single time something went wrong. Marcus reached for the mirror. And Ryan stayed inside the same comfortable circle for 10 straight years, while Marcus kept stretching his one calculated risk at a time. 7 traps, 7 decisions, one completely different life. That's the sacrifice rule in action. If you don't want to be like everyone else, you have to make the sacrifices others aren't willing to make. Not reckless sacrifices, calculated ones. The sacrifice of a little more comfort right now in exchange for a completely different life 10 years from now. Here's your homework before you close this video. Go back through those 7 traps in your head right now and be honest with yourself about exactly which ones you're currently standing in. Most people will find themselves in at least 3 of them. I want you to find yours. If this video actually helped you see something you couldn't quite see before, do 2 things for me right now. Hit subscribe because I'm breaking down exactly this kind of financial psychology every single week right here on David Marshall Finance, and drop a comment telling me which one of these 7 traps hit closest to home for you personally. I read every single one of them. I'll see you in the next video.